Hi, everyone. As it says, I'm Ben Wellington. I'm a data storyteller. If you had asked me a year ago what a data storyteller was, I would probably say I have no idea what a data storyteller is. So today, I'm going to tell you about my journey over the last year, where I've accidentally became a data storyteller. I'm going to tell you about what I learned along the way, and maybe convince some of you that you too can be data storytellers if you're curious and want to. My story, a little bit about my background. So first, I work at an investment and tech company called 2 Sigma, where I do data science. So that's sort of one part of my world. But I also married an urban planner. So I've got my computer science and the urban planning world. And for most of the time, these two sections of my life have been pretty separate. And that was just the way it was. Until something interesting happened here in New York City. In 2011, then Mayor Bloomberg signed this legislation called the Open Data Laws in New York. The Open Data Laws are really exciting for people like me because it takes data that's sort of inside city government and suddenly allows anyone to look at it. So whereas before the government would analyze something and tell us, hey, this neighborhood has this many accidents, now we can see data point by data point what's happening at a very, very local level. And so when these two things came together, they ended up on, by the way, there's an open data portal I should point out that anyone can go to. It's the New York City Open Data Portal. And there's data sets on all sorts of things. In fact, there's one on the size of the televisions in Times Square and their locations. So you can, I don't know what to do with that, but it's really cool. So there's data sets of all different types. And in fact, over 1,200 data sets so far, and it's growing all the time. So I kind of took this data science work and my interest in urban planning from discussions with my wife and put it together in this blog called iQuant New York. Yes, somebody knows it. All right. Awesome, thank you. One of the first things I did was this map. And this is a map of cycling injuries in New York City. So red areas, hilarious injuries. No, it is interesting. Red areas are areas where people were getting in more cyclist accidents. And I found this through some public data and mapped it all. I noticed a few things. One, on the east side of Manhattan was where there was a lot more cycling accidents, more injuries. That's because that's where there are more cyclists coming off the bridges, right? But also there were some other hot spots like Williamsburg in Brooklyn or Roosevelt Avenue in Queens. And so I wrote about that and posted it on the blog. And it was more just for me to learn how to do mapping. It was this open source software called QGIS. I wanted to learn it. I posted it. And when I did, something interesting happened. People started to write about it. So Gothamist covered it. And Brooklyn actually claimed that I had claimed it was a death trap, which was not exactly what I said. Streets blog, and then even in The Atlantic. And this is just sort of from a blog that I just put on Tumblr, and it had no followers. And wow, that was really interesting. So over the time from there, I started to say, well, why did people write about that? I'm not the first person to analyze cyclist accidents. I'm not the first person to make maps like this. What I did wasn't that complicated. What was it that made it spread? And I thought about it, and I worked over the next few posts I did to see what was kind of moving around. And I realized that there was a third part to this that was really, really important. And that is, you're probably not going to see it coming, improv comedy. Yes, improv comedy. So I've been doing improv since I was in a summer camp called French Woods. Yeah, French Woods alumni, anyone? Okay. In upstate New York. I did improv since I was about 13 years old. I've been doing it ever since. And I've learned a lot of things in improv that I realized I was bringing into my writing, that I was bringing into this data science to make people kind of more interested in it. And so I think in order to spread sort of science, you need to be able to tell those stories. So I'm going to tell you about why improv relates to data science and how they can come together to tell better stories. And that's why I call it data storytelling. It's what I've kind of noticed fallen into. So first, in stories, you want to connect with people's experiences, right? If you're doing an improv scene, you learn, if you're brushing your teeth next to your wife, and that's something that we can people can relate to, how they look when they're brushing their teeth. You can do a scene through that, and people will kind of relate to it because they have experiences there. So I try to write about things that New Yorkers experience. And I figured, what do New Yorkers experience more than Duane Reade? Right? So I thought this might be interesting. It turned out it was. I mapped every single building in New York to the closest pharmacy, and I colored it by the pharmacy. Orange is Duane Reade, red is CVS, blue is Walgreens, yellow is Rite Aid. I mapped the whole, first of all, this neighborhood, yeah, it's Duane Reade country. No question. I also learned that CVS and Rite Aid are attacking from the water. Good strategy, CVS. Come in from the Hudson. Duane Reade will not see you coming. And I thought to myself, is Duane Reade really a New York thing? It turns out, no, it's a Manhattan thing. If we zoom out even more, the Bronx is Rite Aid country. And really, Brooklyn and Queens are just a patchwork. This is interesting. If you work for one of those companies, it's probably very interesting. For me, it's interesting just wondering what our experiences are and how we can start to quantify them and tell stories of our lives. So really, that's something that we can all kind of relate to, and that's part of storytelling, even in data analysis. The other thing I noticed is you want to focus on a single idea, right? In an improv scene, you can try to have 7 ideas going, but things can get lost pretty quickly. So in my work, I try to focus on one idea. And when I went and looked at city bike data is interesting. There's people leaving stations, coming to stations. There's a lot of data. What if we take one idea, and that idea is gender? Okay? Here I've mapped the percent of male and female riders on city bike riders in New York City. What we can see is that in this neighborhood, over 80% of the riders are male. So this is a very male-dominant city bike neighborhood. What does that tell us? It could be about our transportation infrastructure. It could be it's a study of gender here in the city. And also, if you're looking to meet a girl on a city bike, go to Brooklyn. That's important. But what the important thing here is it's one idea. It's just gender. There's a lot of columns in that data. It's a big data set, but let's study just one. The other thing is keep it simple. So not just one idea, but one simple idea. Ideas can be very complex, and you find yourself in improv thinking, oh, well, if this guy goes here and this, and you're just going to lose everybody very quickly. So I also try to keep it simple. So when people hear that I do math, they often think like I do this. But it's more like this. I mean, I just count things. I do sums. Maybe I do a percentage. And this is all just sort of high school math. It's not, it's not crazy math. So people can really do this if they stop and start to ask the questions. So an example, I looked at the percent of parking tickets from out-of-state plates in every precinct in New York. And what we see is in this neighborhood, there's a higher percent of people coming in from out of state and getting tickets, which is telling, right? That's people driving into Midtown, more likely. And as you get farther out in our boroughs, there's less travelers. Also makes sense. But I also want to do this per state. So first I was like, Jersey, Midtown. Yes, it shows in the data that new people from New Jersey are driving into Midtown. If you look at Connecticut, completely different picture. They're coming in from the north. You can actually see it. They're going to the Botanical Gardens in the Bronx. And my absolute favorite, Californians. Where do you think they hang out? The hippest parts of Brooklyn. Williamsburg, Bushwick, Greenpoint. That's where people from California get parking tickets. Can tell us so much about our city by looking at our data. And also explore the things that you know best. You all come from different fields. You know the things that you know. You know the area that you study very well, the area you work in. I kind of am learning New York. I've lived here for over a decade, so I focus on New York. When in an improv, if you're a lawyer and you go to a scene as a lawyer, that scene's going to be good because you know all the vocabulary. You can play it to the very top of your intelligence and just hit it. I try to do work in other cities, but it's hard. I don't have any context. So for today, I did an analysis of Times Square, and I thought, well, what can we all relate to? Well, maybe catching a cab. I was curious where people catch cabs around Times Square. So that's 8th Avenue over here. You can see that people in general are catching cabs at 8th Avenue when they're leaving this district. Less so heading south on 7th Avenue. And you can see that the big yellow blurb in the lower left is the Port Authority. So that makes sense. But really, people are heading towards the avenues. What's interesting here is that that's where people catch cabs. Where do you think people get out of cabs? They actually get out more on cross streets. It's much more of a grid. And this makes a lot of sense, right? If you're catching a cab somewhere, especially if you're maybe a tourist, you give the person the address and they bring you to the address. They're not dropping you off on a corner and say, good luck, buddy. So that doesn't happen. And what I really, really liked about this was I noticed that depending on the direction of the street, people get out of cabs differently. So there's 7th Avenue. If you're coming in on 46, you're going west to east, you seem to get off on the west side of the avenue. Why? You ever get a cab stuck in traffic? You just get out. You can actually see it in the data. Because look, if you're coming in the other side, you can see people are getting out on that side of the avenue. So really, people are getting out of, depending on the direction of the street, people are getting out of the taxis because they're probably waiting at lights. And this is interesting, right? If you're trying to do advertising in the district, you might want to know where to welcome people. Where are people getting out most often? We can start to study this with our public data. And with this, you want to try to make an impact. I've tried to make an impact in city government by doing some of this work. Each of you has your own ways you can make impacts. In particular, I did one proof, a mathematical proof that no matter how many times you ride the subway and refill using their buttons, you can't get a zero balance. Like literally, it's not just you or you or you. You literally can't get a zero balance if you use their buttons. So there's a trick, you can type 1905 and get a balance. And when I wrote about this, the MTA responded. So all right, maybe there's an impact. And they said, these machines do not hold an infinite amount of change. And the denominations are suggested to ensure there is ample change to accommodate customers who pay with cash. That being said, we will certainly look at this as part of the process involved in rolling out the next fare increase. So the fare increase is coming. We'll see that. Imagine in a world in March where you're like, I want $20 in a MetroCard, and you get $20 in a MetroCard. Like, how much would that be? And they say $18.43, and you pay. As opposed to now, I'm going to pay $20. We're going to give you a random amount above that. Imagine if we switch that. We can run our city better, right? So we'll see if the MTA follows through. I'd love to make an impact there. I also found something strange, which is that in half the city cabs, the tipping is based on just the fare and the surcharge. So if you get into a Verifone cab and you hit the 20% button, you're actually paying 20% on top of the taxi fare and a little bit of a surcharge. But if it's run by Creative Mobile Technologies, the other half of the cab, and you hit the 20% button, you're paying on top of taxes and tolls. So for two different computers, you're paying more tips in one of the computer setups than the other because it's calculating tip on top of tolls. And is this a big deal? Well, those drivers are making $250 more a year in tips by this little bit of rounding. So we have half our cabs where we're all paying a little more, and the drivers are being paid more, which isn't a bad thing, but it's kind of inequitable. When I pointed this out to the TLC, they said, we appreciate the work that went into his analysis, and we're giving it a thorough read. Impact. All right, so I'm working on it. And my favorite was this. I mapped fire hydrants in New York City. And these aren't just any fire hydrants. These are the fire hydrants mapped by the amount of parking ticket revenue they're creating. So these are the top 250 culprits in New York City. First, on the Upper East Side, watch out. The 19th precinct will ticket you no matter where you park for a hydrant, apparently. But more interesting were these two hydrants that were down on the Lower East Side. And they were generating $55,000 a year in tickets. Two hydrants, $55,000 for like 5 or 6 years. So finally, the data's public. I had a look. And when I went to figure out what was happening, it turns out that there's basically a hydrant and then what looks kind of like a bike lane and then a parking spot. So you go in and you're like, I'm not in front of the curb or the hydrant. There's a bike lane between us. Well, it turns out that while the DOT painted a parking spot, the NYPD disagreed. And so they would ticket the spot for years and years. And this is actually a shot from the Google Street View car going by, and it caught the ticket, which I really appreciated. Really appreciated. So I wrote about that, and I heard from the city again. While the DOT has not received any complaints about this location, we will review the roadway markings and make any appropriate alterations. That's an action statement. We're getting better. So I thought to myself, well, government, I'm going to keep trying to make an impact. And suddenly, they repainted the spot. Yeah. Impact. So somebody's listening. This is great. So you can look at your data, and you can have an impact. Sometimes maybe your message isn't going to get through. But for each of these things where I know a statement was made, I know that I've changed at least some thinking in these agencies, that somebody is now thinking about this thing. So I consider those to be making impact as well. And if you think, and to do that, once again, I think you really need to think about some of the things about storytelling, like connect with people, try to convey one idea, keep it simple, and explore the things that you know best. And in case you think that, oh, this whole data thing is not for me, that's for computer people, the Open Data Portal is really easy to use. I teach a class of statistics at Pratt for urban planners. And in our second day of class, one of my students turned this, which is a list of accidents in the neighborhood around Pratt, to this analysis of injuries by vehicle type. And this is just for one or two classes using Excel. This is not some crazy programming thing. And if you're scared of that, this is a data set of graffiti or 311 complaints, and a student in a program called City Term, which brings students to learn about the city. It's a high school semester in the city program. A student named Abby created this map. So if you're scared of computers, that's OK too. Understanding where graffiti is in New York City. So it's not about being a computer. Anyone can take data. You just have to know what questions to ask and try to tell your own story. And I just hope everyone realizes that anyone here can be a data storyteller. Thank you.